In the most general sense, anger is a feeling or an emotion that ranges from mild irritation to intense fury and rage. Anger is a natural response to those situations where we feel threatened, or we believe harm has come to us, or we believe that another person has unnecessarily wronged us. We may also become angry when we feel another person, like a child or someone close to us, is being threatened or harmed. Anger can be this positive emotion. Maybe it's a moral response to an injustice or a rational response to a threat, and it can be expressed in assertive and productive ways. In addition, anger can result from frustration when our needs and our desires and our goals are not being met. And when we become angry, we may lose our patience and act impulsively, aggressively, or maybe violently. And people often confuse anger with aggression. Aggression is the behavior that's intended to cause harm to another person or damage property. And this behavior can include verbal abuse, threats, or maybe violent acts. Anger, on the other hand, is an emotion and doesn't necessarily lead to aggression. So a person can become angry without acting aggressively. A term related to anger and aggression is hostility. And hostility is going to refer to a complex set of attitudes and judgments that motivate aggressive behaviors. Whereas anger is an emotion and aggression is a behavior, hostility is an attitude that involves disliking other people and evaluating them negatively. So in these lessons, you're going to learn some helpful strategies and skills to manage your anger, express your anger in constructive ways, solve your problems, change some hostile attitudes, and prevent aggressive acts like verbal or violence. So anger becomes a problem when it's felt too intensely, or it's felt too frequently, or it's expressed inappropriately. Feeling anger too intensely or frequently places extreme physical strain on the body. And during prolonged and frequent episodes of anger, certain parts of the nervous system are going to become highly activated. And consequently, blood pressure and heart rate are going to increase and stay elevated for long periods. And this stress on the body may produce many different health problems like hypertension, heart disease, and a diminished immune system efficiency. So, from a health standpoint, avoiding physical illness is a motivation for controlling your anger. Another compelling reason to control anger concerns the negative consequences that result from expressing anger inappropriately. In the extreme, anger can lead to violence or physical aggression, and that can result in numerous negative consequences like being arrested or being jailed, losing your job, being physically injured, being retaliated against, alienating your loved ones, being terminated from a substance use disorder treatment or social service program, maybe feeling guilt or shame or regret. And even when that anger does not lead to violence, the inappropriate expression of anger, like verbal abuse or intimidating or threatening behavior, is often going to result in negative consequences. So, for example, it's likely that others are going to develop fear or resentment or lack of trust toward those who subject them to their anger outbursts. And that's going to cause alienation from friends or family members or coworkers or just people in general. And the inappropriate expression of anger initially has these apparent payoffs. One payoff is being able to manipulate and control other people through aggressive and intimidating behavior. Others might comply with someone's demands because they fear the verbal threats or the violence. Another payoff is the release of tension that happens when you lose your temper and act aggressively. You may feel better after an anger outburst, but everybody else around you is going to feel worse. So in the long term, these initial payoffs are going to lead to negative consequences. And for that reason, we call them apparent payoffs, because the long-term negative consequences are going to far outweigh those short-term gains. So, for example, maybe consider a father who persuades his children to comply with his demands when he uses an angry tone or he uses threatening gestures. these behaviors imply to the children that they're going to receive physical harm if they're not obedient. So the immediate payoff for the father is that the children are going to obey his commands. The long-term consequence, however, might be that the children learn to fear or dislike him and become emotionally detached from him. And as they grow older, they're going to avoid contact with him or maybe refuse to see him altogether. So one misconception or myth about anger is the way that we behaviorally express anger, that it's inherited or it can't be changed. And our facial expressions and our nervous system response when we become angry are inherited. But what we do next, our behavior, that's learned. And sometimes we might hear somebody say, "Oh, I inherited my anger from my father. That's just how I am." But this statement implies that the behavioral expression of anger is fixed and it can't be changed. And although to some extent a person's proneness toward anger has a genetic basis, like maybe psychological traits like proneness toward anger, and that's not fixed. The psychological traits. A person's childhood environment is going to play a major role in determining how that person expresses their anger. So because people are not born with this set specific way of expressing anger, it is possible that we can learn some more appropriate ways of expressing our anger. And similarly, it is possible to change the way that your nervous system reacts after you get angry. You can learn to calm down more quickly with a little bit of practice. The approach to anger management that's used in this treatment was influenced by Bandura in 2018, the social cognitive theory. So in particular, the assumption that behavior is socially learned. And a lot of studies have established that the way people learn to express anger and violence is by observing other people, particularly the influential people in their lives. So that might include your parents, your family members, your friends. And if children observe their parents expressing anger through aggressive acts, like verbal abuse or maybe violence, then it's very likely that they're going to learn to express their anger in similar ways. And fortunately for, our purposes, we can change this behavior by learning some new and appropriate ways of expressing anger. It's not necessary to continue to express anger by aggressive and violent means. A related myth involves the misconception that the only effective way to express anger is through aggression. And it's commonly thought that anger is something that builds and escalates to the point of an aggressive outburst. But as we saw earlier, anger does not necessarily lead to aggression. In fact, effective anger management is going to involve controlling that escalation of the anger by learning assertiveness skills, changing negative and hostile thoughts, or maybe self-talk, challenging our maladaptive beliefs, and employing a variety of behavioral strategies. And these skills and techniques and strategies I'm going to talk about in other videos. But a lot of people confuse assertiveness with aggression. The goal of aggression is to dominate and intimidate and harm or injure another person, to win at any cost. But on the flip side, the goal of assertiveness is to express your feelings of anger in a way that's respectful of other people. So, for example, if you were upset because a friend was repeatedly late for meetings, then you could respond by shouting obscenities and name-calling. And this approach is an attack on the other person rather than an attempt to address the behavior that you find frustrating or anger-provoking. An assertive way of handling this situation might be to say, "Hey, when you're late for a meeting with me, I get pretty frustrated, and I wish that you would be on time more often." This I statement is expressing your feelings of frustration and your feelings of dissatisfaction, and it's going to communicate how you would like the situation to be changed. The expression doesn't blame the other person or threaten the other person, and it minimizes the chance of causing emotional harm to that other person. And for a lot of years, the popular belief along a lot of mental health professionals and lay people in general was that the aggressive expression of anger, like screaming or beating on pillows, was healthy and therapeutic. But research studies have found that people who express their anger aggressively simply get better at being angry. So, in other words, expressing anger in an aggressive manner is going to reinforce that aggressive behavior. And so, this time it's the pillow, but next time the pillow's not around, and the only thing to release your aggression on is that other person's face. So, not only is the behavioral expression of anger learned, but it can become routine and familiar and a really predictable response to a variety of situations. So, in the short term, people expressing anger often get their way. So, they might keep using anger. And when anger is displayed frequently and aggressively, it becomes this maladaptive habit because it results in negative consequences. And habits, by definition, are performed over and over again without thinking. People with anger management problems often resort to aggressive displays of anger to solve their problems without thinking about the negative consequences that they could suffer or the effects that it may have on the people around them. So, to change your anger habit, you have to develop an awareness of the circumstances and the behaviors that are triggering your anger. And it's also important to be aware of the events or the situations that could result in anger, even when other people aren't involved, like maybe when your car won't start or when your computer malfunctions. And this awareness also involves understanding the negative consequences that result from your anger. So, maybe, for example, you might be in line at the supermarket and become impatient because the lines are too long. And in this case, perhaps your anger is triggered by having your time wasted or by being made late for an appointment. Or you could become angry and then demand that the checkout clerk call for more help. And then as your anger is escalating, you may become involved in a heated exchange with the clerk or maybe another customer. And the store manager might respond by having the security officer remove you from the store. So the negative consequences that result from this event are not getting the groceries that you wanted, and the embarrassment and the humiliation that you're suffering from being removed from the store. In another video, I'm going to introduce the anger meter and the anger awareness record. These are tools that are going to help you to gain a deeper awareness of your anger by helping you track what led to the anger and the consequences of your anger episodes. The more that you are aware of these things, the more easy it is to identify them as they're happening in your day-to-day life. So, in addition to becoming more aware of the anger, you need to develop skills and strategies to effectively manage it. And these strategies can be used to stop that escalation of the anger before you experience any negative consequences. An effective set of strategies for controlling your anger could include immediate, interpersonal, and preventive strategies. Immediate strategies are going to include taking a time out, some deep breathing exercises, and thought stopping. Interpersonal strategies are going to be including strengthening your assertive communication and your problem-solving skills. And the preventive strategies are going to include developing an exercise program and changing some of your maladaptive beliefs. And these strategies I'll talk about in other videos that are coming out. But one example of an anger management strategy that you can use right now is the timeout. The timeout involves leaving a situation if you feel like your anger is escalating out of control. So, for example, you might be a passenger on a crowded bus and become angry because you perceive that people are deliberately bumping into you. And in this situation, you can just simply get off the bus and wait for a less crowded bus. And this informal use of a timeout may involve stopping yourself from engaging in a discussion or an argument if you feel like you're becoming too angry. The key here to the timeout is once you calm down to come back and discuss that with the other person. That would be the formal timeout. You have a plan with your partner or your family member or your friend that, hey, if I feel angry or I feel myself getting angry, I'm going to call a timeout. I'm going to go and calm down. And then you come back and have the conversation with them once you've had time to cool off. If you don't come back and finish the conversation, then that other person learns to distrust your timeout. And then they're not going to give you the timeout anymore. They're just going to follow you around the house and say something outlandish like, yeah, that's why you're just like your daddy. It leads to more problems. So make sure that you come back and you finish the conversation once you're level-headed and cool. So one technique that's helpful in increasing the awareness of anger is learning to monitor it. A simple way to monitor your anger is to use what's called the anger meter. A 1 on the anger meter is going to represent a complete lack of anger or a total state of calm, whereas a 10 is going to represent intense anger, along with that feeling that you might lose control. And that leads to negative consequences. So points between the 1 and the 10 are going to represent feelings of anger between those extremes. And the purpose of the anger meter is to monitor the escalation of anger as it's moving up the scale. So for example, when a person encounters an anger-provoking event, they don't reach a 10 immediately. Sometimes it feels like that, but they're not reaching it immediately. In reality, the individual's anger is starting at a low number and then rapidly moving up that scale. But there's always time, provided that you've learned the proper coping skills, there's always time to stop that anger from escalating to a 10. You can go anywhere up to a 9 and turn around before there's any consequences. But it's important for you to understand that a 10 is reserved for instances when you begin to lose control and suffer, or maybe other people could suffer negative consequences. An example might be when a person angrily threatens an intimate partner and the partner moves out, or when an individual assaults another person and is arrested by the police. And a second point to make here about the anger meter is that people may interpret the numbers on the scale differently. So what may be a 5 for one person could be a 7 for someone else. It's much more important to personalize this anger meter and become comfortable and familiar with your own individual readings of the numbers on the scale. But just keep in mind that a 10 is reserved for instances when somebody starts to lose control and they suffer or they could suffer negative consequences.